In this video, we will discuss the ethics of scientific research in psychology. In 1998, The Lancet published an article that became hugely influential. This paper claimed that there was a relationship between infants and receiving the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine in the later development of autism. This paper went so far as to even suggest a causal claim that vaccines could cause autism. Since this paper, many parents have decided not to vaccinate their children and has helped to spur the anti-vax movement. This puts children at higher risks for disease. The problem is that several follow-up studies by independent researchers have failed to find the same relationship between vaccines and autism. We know now, and it's widely accepted in the scientific community, that there's absolutely no relationship between the two. Actually, there are several problems with that initial paper published back in 1998. The lead researcher on the project had financial conflicts of interest that weren't initially disclosed. This researcher was involved with a patent to a competing measles vaccine, and any conclusion that discouraged the use of this previous MMR vaccine would put him in a position to benefit financially. There were also biased methods to pick out and test participants in the study and used unapproved procedures on them. The article was later retracted and the lead researcher's medical license was completely revoked. This is just one of many examples that shows the importance of proper research ethics. Appropriate ethics can help to prevent a host of unseen future problems. But this is definitely not the first occurrence of ethical violations. One of the first ethical codes was the Nuremberg Code, which we'll talk about in detail in another video. This code was written in 1947 in conjunction with the trials of several Nazi physicians accused of conducting cruel experiments on concentration camp prisoners during World War II. These physicians performed a variety of medical experiments on unwilling participants or prisoners. These experiments were pretty gruesome. For example, physicians would break and re-break bones over and over again just to see how many times they could be broken before they wouldn't heal again. They would expose people to extreme high altitudes and freezing waters to see how long people could survive those conditions. People died with these experiments. When others found out about these, some of the physicians were tried and convicted of their war crimes at Nuremberg. And today we talk about this as a lesson in ethics and still review the Nuremberg Code to this day. The Tuskegee syphilis study was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972. They recruited poor African American men around Tuskegee, Alabama to participate in this study and were told they were being treated for bad blood. Although they were given some access to some form of free medical care, they were specifically not treated for the syphilis that they had. The real goal of this study was to see how the disease developed in untreated patients. By the 1940s, the drug penicillin had come on the scene and became the standard treatment for syphilis. But even then, these men continued to be denied treatment without being given an opportunity to leave the study. And left untreated, syphilis progresses through different stages, including neurosyphilis, which is an infection in the central nervous system, which is completely fatal. The study was finally stopped in 1972, 40 years later. This happened only when the details of the study were made public by journalists and activists. Today, we recognize this study and that researchers need to consider issues of justice and fairness at the societal level. 65 years after the study began and 25 years after it ended, Bill Clinton finally issued an apology on behalf of the United States. He said, "So today America does remember the hundreds of men used in research without their knowledge and consent. We remember them and their family members, men who were poor and African American, without resources and with few alternatives. They believed they had found hope when they were offered free medical care by the United States Public Health Service. They were betrayed." These studies make it clear the need for proper informed consent and review of research and the ability for subjects to withdraw from research voluntarily. The Milgram 1963 study is one of the most influential studies in all of psychology, which focused on studying obedience to authority. However, this is another example we typically review in terms of research ethics. In this study, subjects were told they were taking part in a study on the effects of punishment on learning. They were instructed to give electric shocks to a participant in another room every time that person responded incorrectly on a learning trial. The experiment was set up to where each time the hidden Confederate responded incorrectly, the subject had to administer a stronger and stronger shock, which eventually would cause the hidden Confederate to complain about pain, scream out loud, and even stop responding, which was indicative of a loss of consciousness. When subjects were hesitant to administer strong shocks, the experimenter would say something to the effect of, "It's imperative that you continue." In reality, the Confederate in the hidden room was part of the experiment and was not actually receiving real shocks. The interesting result of this study was that the majority of the real subjects who came into the lab continued to administer those increasingly painful shocks even when the Confederate complained or screamed for them to stop. This is definitely one of the most important results in psychology and helps us to understand events such as obedience to authority during the Holocaust or mistreatment of prisoners. But this study came at the cost of severe psychological stress in these people. A big issue that people still debate today is whether that study was worth it or not. Running the same study today surely would be rejected from an institutional review board. Milgram's own description of the study was pretty revealing. He said, in a large number of cases, the degree of tension reached extremes that are rarely seen in socio-psychological laboratory studies. Subjects were observed to sweat, tremble, stutter, bite their lips, groan, and dig their fingernails into their flesh. On one occasion, we observed a seizure of laughter so violently convulsive that it was necessary to call a halt to the experiment. Another observer reported that within 20 minutes, one participant was reduced to a twitching, stuttering wreck who was rapidly approaching the point of nervous collapse. I've included a YouTube link here that shows a little bit about the study. I won't show the video here, but on your own time, you can go ahead and watch that video. And a final example, loosely similar to the Milgram study, was performed by Haney, Banks, and Zimbardo in 1973. In this experiment, male undergraduate students were randomly assigned to play either a prisoner or a prison guard for 1 week in a fake prison study. Really, the only rule here was that no physical abuse was allowed. Other than that, participants in this experiment didn't receive any specific training on what to do other than to assume the role of either a prisoner or a prison guard. Within a couple of days, however, the participants playing the role of prisoners began to show signs of depression and helplessness. The participants playing the guard started to show behaviors that were excessively aggressive and even dehumanizing towards the prisoners. Upwards to half of the prisoners showed problems so severe they had to be released for their own mental health. The entire experiment was even stopped early to ensure the safety of the remaining participants. The results of this experiment are extreme, no doubt, and show that people can quickly assume different roles or types of roles pretty easily. But they also demonstrated the need as proper researchers to continuously observe our participants throughout entire experiments to ensure that subjects aren't harmed in any way and that the well-being of subjects is maintained. Milgram actually said to Zimbardo informally and probably in a half-joking manner that he was even glad that Zimbardo ran his experiment because he would take some of the heat off of him for running the most unethical psychological study ever. I've also included a YouTube link here that I won't show, but I really encourage you to watch that video after this lecture. It goes over this Zimbardo prison study. Now that we've covered a few examples of experiments detailing the need for proper research ethics, the next video will go over specifics about the code of ethics that we will follow when doing different types of experimental research. See you next time.